Earlier today, Senator Bernie Sanders called out the video game industry for basically fostering a culture centered around treating employees poorly. Now, they do that in order to, of course, attempt to push out games and content as fast as possible while these employees have very little representation. In fact, Bernie's tweet was this. He said, quote, "The video game industry made $43 billion in revenue last year. The workers responsible for that profit deserve to collectively bargain as part of a union. I'm glad to see the unions like IATSE and the broader game workers movement organizing such workers." So basically, he's making the call for more unionization of video game developers, which I think is a fantastic idea. Now, in that tweet was an article that was linked to, and it came out, I think, last week. Now, it went into some of the details of why this worker representation is actually needed. Now, in it, the author, Alana Samuels, who's a reporter for Time Magazine, writes this, quote, "A difficult truth about the gaming industry is beginning to emerge. What's seen by outsiders as a fun, creative business is becoming psychologically and financially unbearable for those working in it." Now, she tells the story in this of a man named Nathan Allen Ortega. And then in the article, she actually gets a lot of quotes from people who formerly worked as developers within Telltale Games, which, of course, was recently, maybe not recently, but was shut down. Now, he explained that part of the problem was that executives would basically order game changes at the last minute that would send developers into an overdrive, which would then, of course, lead to inferior, sometimes broken products. Anthem. This made Ortega's job of marketing the game that much more difficult. He said, quote, "I was working with compromised games made by people killing themselves to get them out the door month after month after month." So, I mean, again, we've seen examples of this. Everybody who's ever gotten a broken game or did a pre-order or an early access release or anything like that sees, that it's run into even a bug, right? Or 20. That's the kind of situation that leads to these bugs, right? That's the kind of situation where they just rush it out the door, last minute change. And some of that, of course, is due to consumer feedback, right? Player feedback. Oh, the players don't like this, so now we're going to change it. Rush, 100-hour weeks. Let's do the crunch, right? Now, it got so bad that Ortega, both his doctor and his therapist, had advised him to quit. Now, this is a guy who thought it was like, oh my God, this is my dream job working at Telltale Games. So, yes, I want to work there. Yes, I want to do this. And it got so bad to the point of where they're like, you need to quit. You got to go. Now, Ortega is like, no, you don't understand. Yes, this is really, really hard, but I'm so lucky to still have this job. And that's, of course, part of that, that mythos surrounding the game industry. That you're so fortunate to be able to get a job at Blizzard or EA or Activision, or I should say Activision Blizzard, or any of these gaming companies that, I mean, the expectation to work 100-hour weeks just comes with the territory. And so he stayed around until Telltale laid off 25% of its staff in 2017. Now, the article continues by saying, the nightmare hours and job uncertainty at Telltale are by no means unique in the game industry. According to 10 video game workers who spoke to Time, there's a belief that they said, and I mentioned this earlier, in the games industry that working in it is a privilege and that you should be willing to do whatever it takes to stay there. This is Emily Grace Buck, who was also a former narrative designer at Telltale Games. Now, the most important thing, she said, to remember is that it's not every single game studio that's functioning like this, but this is the vast majority. This is normal for this industry. And that is absolutely sad. Game creators face other serious challenges, too. In early May, 150 workers walked out at Riot Games, which published, of course, League of Legends. Now, they said the company was not doing enough to respond to allegations of sexism. One developer for Mortal Kombat 11 recently told gaming site Kotaku that he was diagnosed with PTSD after working on it. Now, the article goes on, of course, to explain the practice of what we call crunch. Now, crunch is defined as a period just before launch when workers are expected to put in 100-hour weeks with no extra pay. 100-hour weeks, no extra pay. That's ridiculous. BioWare is actually the most famous example of that crunch. They even had a name for it. It's BioWare magic. They think that the more you crush your employees, the better content you'll get out. And they were lucky with some of the games that they had created. For example, you had Mass Effect 2, widely considered to be one of the best in the series, aside from, I guess, the first Mass Effect. But I think Mass Effect 2 is probably the most popular. BioWare magic. The Dragon Age series, BioWare magic. But after a certain point, it stops getting magical. When you crush your employees, it doesn't actually make them more creative. It burns them out. It destroys them. And you end up often losing a lot of your top talent simply because they just can't work in those conditions anymore. And we've seen that from a lot of these companies. And so, of course, that's why we end up with subpar games. Mass Effect Andromeda, Anthem. And I know I'm picking on BioWare, but there's other great examples as well of games that just didn't perform very well. And it's because of what they're doing to their employees. Now, Anthem, as I said, I'm going to keep picking on Anthem because, look, let me be honest about that. I played all the way through the campaign. I went to endgame on Anthem, so I know what I'm talking about here, right? I played it so you didn't have to. And look, Anthem is a live service game. Constant updates, new content. That is a good example of how these companies increase crunch time. They actually extend it indefinitely. That same model, while crunching developers to the point of mental breakdown, does make publishers a lot of money. For example, game company Take-Two said in its annual report in May that digital sales made up 63% of revenue in the most recent fiscal year. That is up from 52% in 2017. So now you have publishers like EA doing loot boxes. You also have games as a service, DLCs, constant updates. Now, that creates a whole lot of profit for a few people and generally burns out your employees. Now, there's a lot of blame to go around here, right? Now, most of it, of course, goes to companies, management, shareholders, and all that stuff. And again, the profit motive here is to squeeze out every single last drop of money from the players. That makes a lot of players angry. But there's also some blame to go for the players, too. Not about that, but on the developer breakdown, right? And look, again, I'm a gamer myself. I know what I'm talking about. And if you go into any game forums, you will see those people who are, a tiny minority of people that are just excessively angry and demanding. They think that they could do the games better than the devs themselves. They'll whine and cry and bitch and complain, and they'll ruin it for the rest of us. They'll make the forums a no-go zone, right? In fact, there's an example that they use, and that's Jermaine Davis. Jermaine Davis is a military veteran. He used to play a lot of video games, right? He said he'd go home after 12-hour days playing video games for work and play more video games at home. Until, of course, all this, as well as the crunch, ruined his perspective. He said, quote, "The whole player base for the video games is like King Joffrey in Game of Thrones. And the whole industry is terrified of losing players because there are so many other options." I don't necessarily agree 100% with that. I don't think the entire game base is Joffrey. I think there's very few people that are that bad. But if we're going to make Game of Thrones analogies, right, would EA be the Lannisters? Oh, right, the Lannisters always pay their debts. Or who would be the Iron Bank of Bravos then, I wonder? I don't know. Anyway, but again, in some respect, he is correct. There is a large vocal, I'm sorry, more of it seems like they're large, but there's a minority of vocal gamers that are toxic that happen to be garbage. Again, not the majority, but a minority that are terrible people. And a lot of them take out their rage on the workers, the community workers. Now, that's not to say that some devs and community workers don't also suck. There's so many problems with games right now that it's really, really hard to nail down, and there's so much fault to go around. Again, loot box controversies, toxic communities on the other side, devs being crushed to the point of mental breakdowns and rage, lashing out. That leads to consumers being charged for inferior half-completed games, which of course antagonizes the community even more. The only people winning here are game companies. And that's it. I mean, total spending in the US, video game market in 2018 was 38% higher than in 2016. It's increasing share and increasing profits for these companies. Now, getting back to Bernie Sanders, of course. Look, part of the way that we can fix some of these issues, especially, and I think that the players would be less angry. I know I certainly would be less angry if we actually had good completed games that, yes, you can understand having a couple of bugs here and there. But when you release stuff like, a good example, let's go back to the initial release of No Man's Sky. Riddled with bugs, unfinished, without anything that was promised. Now, look, Hello Games picked it up, and over the last few years actually made it a pretty decent game. You also have disasters like Anthem and Fallout 76 that have recently come out. People are tired of getting charged AAA prices for games that are half done and full of bugs. And of course, with pay to win and loot boxes. So you have to get rid of that stuff as well, right? And fix some of that. And I think a lot of that can be fixed with representation for the workers. Because think about it this way. Imagine a union that could stand up to EA and tell them that, hey, your schedule is crap. There's no way we're going to get a good game finished at this time. We need more time to get it done so we can implement all the features that you want, and so you can't change it last minute on us. I would love that. I wouldn't mind waiting a little bit longer to get a complete, full finished game. And not only that, but imagine a union that could shut down the practice of BioWare magic. No more unpaid 100-hour weeks. Might actually make the community a lot better as well. No more exasperated devs, right, that lash out at the community. Because I've seen plenty of that as well. I mean, again, there's a lot of stuff that needs to get fixed. Gaming right now is a bit of a disaster as a whole. And I love gaming, and I'm a gamer with all my heart. And to see the stuff that goes on, to hear about it, it's horrible. It's horrible. And so part of this, of course, is making sure that people have representation. And that's an important part of any sort of workplace. And I'm really glad Bernie Sanders is one of the... I think he's the only one that's actually talking about, hey, you know what you guys need? You need a union. Goddamn right. And that will go to help, I think, fix a decent amount of problems in the gaming industry and make it better for everybody. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.